Thank you very much, Bill. All right, we're going to move on now. We'll still be in legal land here. We're going to have a conversation about the proper role of the courts. And our two panelists are going to be Keith Naughton, who is the co-founder and principal at Silent Majority Strategies with expertise in public choice economics, public policy development, agenda setting, interest group politics, and political behavior. And then Russ Diamond, one of our favorite state representatives who drives people on the other side absolutely nuts. He represents the 102nd Legislative District in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. The area he serves is entirely within Lebanon County, right here in central Pennsylvania. Exactly. So without further ado, I'll turn the panel to the two of them.
Great. Thank you, Jeffrey. Appreciate it. We can go to the first slide, or actually the second slide. We're having some technical problems here. There we go. All right. You just snap your fingers, right? Let's start off with where we stand right now. Right now, there's a 5-2 deficit in the state Supreme Court. We have Justice Saylor is retiring, so that's the justice that would be replaced in this election. Supreme Court majorities are both won and lost over time. So as you see, you need to gain 2 more seats in order to gain the majority. So winning that majority starts this year. Win this race, we can get to majority in 2029. If not, we're looking at 2033, and that's 2 redistricting cycles that we would be in the minority. Now, 3 Democratic justices are up for retention in 2025, so it's possible that another seat could open up. But statistically speaking, a Pennsylvania justice is more likely to be forced in retirement or go to jail than be retained. That's not a joke. That's the truth, unfortunately. So normally, if we can win this race, we can be on track for a 2029 majority. So if we go to the next slide. If we go to the next slide. So these majorities, again, are built up over time. Now, in 1993, Republicans hadn't won a judicial election in decades. But by focusing on these races, by deciding to take them seriously, we're able to, over the next 8 years, gain that majority and gain it for that 2002 redistricting and gain that philosophical majority. Now notice that 3 out of 4 of these candidates who won, they were outspent. And you can expect that. The trial lawyers, the unions are going to outspend you in these races, but you can still win. You can still win if you're organized and you have an effective message. If we go to the next slide. So over the last several cycles, the majority has been retained and lost. Lost in 2007, gained in 2009 for the next redistricting. Then 2015, unfortunately, the bottom fell out and put us in that 5-2 deficit. And we fell behind because we weren't serious about winning. And that's really what elections are all about. They're about winning. They're about being focused. They're about having a strong message. They're about coming together. They're not about factionalism. They're not about worrying about whose friend is running and, oh, I'm upset because my candidate's not up there. Once you have the nomination, you have to pull together, and you have to pull together to win. That didn't happen in 2015. People lost their focus. They weren't serious enough, and that's how you end up losing races. So let's get to the next slide. How do you win these races? Well, they require a lot of laser focus, and I'll sort of flip these bullet points here. The number 1 thing is aggressive messaging. You've got to really focus on what matters to the voter. You know, I like to say that campaigns and politics and elections, they're demand-driven. And what that means is the voter's in charge. A lot of times we make the mistake about talking to people about what we care about, what we're interested, what our sort of hobby horses are. Well, we've already made up our mind. You've got to talk about what that target voter is interested in, what that target group is interested in. You've got to address their concerns. When you do that, That's how you convince them. That's how you get them to turn out. That's how you get them to come out for your candidate. Don't worry about the Pennsylvania Bar Association. They're against us. They're going to be against our candidates. We know that. Just set them aside. Don't worry about the legacy media. You know, there used to be a time where the legacy media addressed, where even people who disagreed with them would sort of look at their websites, take some of their opinions. You know, when I was running campaigns earlier, I used to tell my candidates, well, make sure you go through all your talking points and actually turn up the volume a little bit, because we want our talking points repeated. Reporters in these editorial boards would write these angry articles about how terrible our candidates were, but they were repeating all of our talking points. They were giving us votes and they didn't realize it. They're a lot more easily manipulated than they like to believe. But now people are in their silos. So they're not really, so our voters, independent voters, conservative voters, they're not looking at these traditional newspapers, these traditional sources. So it's really kind of a waste of time to go through them. You want to focus on your social media, on your conservative news sources. That's where you want to get your message out. The third thing, and you've heard this a million times, every vote counts, and it's more true than ever in these types of judicial elections and off-year elections. 2020, nearly 7 million votes. The year before, 2.4 million. So what does that mean? That means that a voter in an off-year election is nearly 3 times as impactful as the voter in the presidential election. So every one of those, every marginal person, every additional person that you turn out means so much more. It's so much more critical. And you've got to find those favorable voters. You know, we just had almost like a little experiment or dry run with the constitutional amendment in May. You know, that passed 52-48. That 52%, those are the people you want to look at. They've already signaled they're open to our candidate. They're open to this message about keeping the judicial system independent, keeping it under control, about not having overreach. And I'd argue there's about another 4 or 5% that are also concerned. They just weren't ready to go as far as amending the Constitution. So you've really got about 56, 57, 58% of the electorate that's ready to hear your message, that's ready to be convinced, that's ready to be turned out, and that's what you have to focus on. So strong messaging, get organized, stay focused, focus on that turnout, and those are the keys to success. Russ?
You're done?
You're up now.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning,
5
everyone.
minutes, that's all.
Isn't it awesome to be in a place where you can see everyone's face? I really thank you for that, Keith. I mean, talking about the way we elect, or the nature of how we win elections is important, but the way we actually conduct our elections is probably just as important. That's what I want to talk to you about today. Because I have a constitutional amendment in the General Assembly, it's House Bill 38, to change the way we elect our statewide judges in the 3 appellate courts, Commonwealth Court, Superior Court, and the Supreme Court. And I think probably everyone in this room appreciates constitutional amendments today, don't you? Yes. Absolutely. So this constitutional amendment that I have, it has already passed 1 session of the General Assembly. It has moved out of committee in the House, and we are awaiting a movement onto the final floor of the House for that second round before we can send it to you so that you can go out to the polls and vote for it. And, you know, constitutional amendments, just like any other legislation, they really should be aimed at solving a problem. The constitutional amendments we just passed solved the problem with a really bad emergency services management code, which we are going to have to go and fix. But House Bill 38 fixes a problem. It's going to cure a long-standing imbalance in our judicial system here in Pennsylvania. And what that imbalance is that certain areas of the Commonwealth are overrepresented on our courts, while other areas of our Commonwealth are underrepresented. And just to give you an example of that, currently speaking, mostly here I'm going to talk about 2 counties, Allegheny and Philadelphia County. and they contain 21.8% of Pennsylvania's population. 21.8%. That's a fifth of our population, but that's important to keep in mind as I read off these numbers to you. Currently, there are 28 seats that are filled. There's 31 total seats on these 3 statewide courts, but there are 28 that are occupied right now. 15 of those, or 53.6%, are people who hail from Allegheny and Philadelphia counties. This is not something new. It's not something that just happened, when we lost those 3 races in whatever year that was,
2015.
2015. This has been going on for over a half a century. I went back, Senator Ryan Aument's staff began this research, and I went back and completed it. I went back 52 years to the beginning of the Commonwealth Court. That's when we first got 3 courts in Pennsylvania from the Constitutional Convention in 1968. So over the last half century, we've had 152 jurists sit on these courts, but 86 of them, or 56.6%, have hailed from Allegheny and Philadelphia counties. Over the course of time, on the Supreme Court alone, 23 of 33 of our Supreme Court justices have come from Allegheny or Philadelphia counties. 69.7%. That's over 2/3 from those 2 counties. Remember, those 2 counties only hold 21.8% of Pennsylvania's population. On the Superior Court, it's 45 of 76 total seats over the last half century. That's 59.2%. Come from Allegheny and Philadelphia County, which only has 21.8% of the population. On the Commonwealth Court, it is a little bit better, 18 of 43 seats, but it's still 41.9%. Those 2 counties are represented at double their rate of population share. Now, to take this perspective in a different way, if we would apply this same kind of map from the Center for Rural Pennsylvania, which has ranked counties and classified them as either rural or urban based on their population per square mile, that average figure is 284 people per square mile in Pennsylvania. So any county with more than that per square mile, the Center for Rural Pennsylvania has considered an urban county. And anything under that they've considered a rural county. And that would be 19 urban counties in Pennsylvania and 48 rural counties. So since 1969, 137 of the 152, or 90.1%, have come from urban counties. Currently, that figure is 25 of 28, or 89.3%. of our jurists on our appellate courts come from urban counties. I would say that rural Pennsylvania is a little bit underrepresented on those courts. So House Bill 38, what it would do, it would change our system of electing judges from everything being a statewide race to regional races. We would divide Pennsylvania into 7 Supreme Court districts, 15 Superior Court districts, and 9 Commonwealth Court districts. And then those jurists who run for those seats, those candidates who want to become an appellate court judge, they would have a residential requirement. They would have to reside in those districts not only before they run for that seat, but during their term of their office. This, I believe, would give you a chance to elect a judge to these appellate courts. Now, if you think about some of the rulings in the courts, let's just go back to, look, the reason we put the constitutional amendments on this past ballot was because of a court ruling. Because we did terminate the governor's disaster emergency last year, but there was a conflict between the Constitution and what the law said. The Constitution said that termination resolution had to get the governor's permission. But the law said we didn't have to get the governor's permission, so there's a conflict. Now, I believe the court should have just thrown out the Emergency Services Management Code entirely and ruled it unconstitutional because of that conflict, but they picked a different way. So we had to put these constitutional amendments on the ballot to let the courts know that the legislative intent is to be a check and balance on executive authority. So and you go back to the election rulings last year. I mean, they were horrific, right? So this is what we're going to try to cure, because that urban-rural divide is absolutely huge on our courts. And I'm not saying there's anything bad about anybody from an urban area, but there is a different judicial philosophy generally from urban areas than there are rural areas. And you can classify it either as conservative or liberal, or you can classify it as contextualist, or the living, breathing theory. And look, whether you agree with any of those judicial temperaments at all, you have to acknowledge that they exist, and we need a mix of that on our appellate courts when they hear issues on appeal. Just like when we make statute in the General Assembly, we have a good mix of rural and urban Pennsylvania that comes to consensus, and we're not dominated by either the urban or the rural votes. So,
Russ, one of the first things that the Democratic majority did was completely out of context, and I think completely illegally, they threw out our congressional map in 2018.
Right.
And they basically said, you know what? We don't like these 4 Republican congressmen. We're just going to get rid of it because we have the majority.
Yeah.
That's the kind of abuse you have to stop.
I've got 7 seconds left here,
Sorry.
so I will just ask you to call your representatives and your senators and ask them to support judicial districts in Pennsylvania. Thank you very much, folks. God bless you.